the truth buried beneath the dust. The sun was sinking behind the red hills of Montana when Thomas Hale rode back to his ranch, as he had for 20 long years, alone, silent, and burdened by a loneliness that reached down to a man's very bones. The wind carried the scent of dust and dry grass, and the sky faded from gold to gray, like an old memory slowly losing color. Thomas wasn't a bad man, just a forgotten one. 6 winters ago, fever had taken his wife. He buried her beneath the old oak behind the barn. Since then, his words were mostly for his horses, or the ghosts that lived within his silent house. The townsfolk called him the lonely rancher, but they didn't know the half of it. What he missed most wasn't love, and it was purpose. And purpose, as life often proves, finds a man only when he's stopped searching for it. It was a spring evening when she came. Evelyn Carter, 24, a widow from the next county, wearing a tiny locket around her neck and storms within her eyes. She rode up to his ranch and, with a trembling voice, said, "I need work." "Sir." Her husband, she explained, had been a soldier, killed near Santa Fe. She had no home left, no family, and the West was never kind to women on their own. "I can cook, clean, care for the horses. I just need a place to stay." Thomas was quiet for a while. He needed help. That much was true. But he'd built walls too high for kindness to climb. And yet there was something in her eyes, something that reminded him of a life he once knew. "You can stay," he said at last, "until you can stand on your own 2 feet. Evelyn lowered her head. "Thank you, Mr. Hale." Days turned to weeks. The air around the ranch began to change. The silence didn't feel as heavy anymore. Evelyn's soft laughter mingled with the wind, like music in a house long forgotten by joy. She brought warmth where there had been only cold. She'd hum while cooking, tend to the horses with care, and each evening, she'd stand by the fence watching the sun set, whispering to someone only the wind could hear. But behind her smile was a shadow, a secret too heavy for her young shoulders. One rainy night, Thomas found her by the fire, her face hidden in her hands. "My husband, he didn't die in battle," she whispered between sobs. "He took his own life, left me with debt and shame. No one would hire me after that." Thomas said nothing. He just sat beside her. In his silence was a kind of understanding, the kind that only those who've known real pain can share. From that night, everything changed. 2 broken souls found warmth in each other's coldness. Nights grew longer, days grew softer. They'd talk by the fire, sharing stories of things lost and lessons learned. Evelyn's laughter filled corners that had been silent for years. And Thomas, as for the first time since his wife's death, smiled without forcing it. The world outside no longer mattered. Not the whispers, not the past, not the pain. But the West. The West never lets happiness rest too long. One morning, Evelyn collapsed in the barn. Thomas carried her to the doctor in town. The old man smiled knowingly. "She's not sick," he said gently. "She's expecting." Thomas froze. Expecting. He didn't know whether to feel joy or fear. Evelyn turned pale as snow. "It's yours," she said quietly. "If you want me to leave, I will." "I never meant for this to happen." Thomas looked at her, the woman who had brought life back into his soul. "You're not going anywhere," he said softly. But news in a small town travels faster than the wind. Whispers became judgment. "That widow trapped him," they said. "She's carrying the rancher's bastard." But Thomas didn't bow his head. He stood tall and told them, "She didn't trap me. I loved her long before I even knew it." His words spread like wildfire, and though people talked, he didn't care. For the first time in years, he wasn't digging graves. He was building a cradle. Months passed. The ranch came alive again. Evelyn's laughter filled the rooms. Her touch softened the man time had turned to stone. Thomas would rest his hand on her belly and whisper, "This child is proof that life gives second chances, but the West never leaves a man without scars." One stormy night, Evelyn went into labor. The doctor was miles away, and the wind screamed across the plains like a wounded beast. Thomas held her hand, whispering prayers to a God he hadn't spoken to in years. "Please," he begged, "don't take her too." Hours passed. Then came silence, and finally the cry of a newborn, a son. But Evelyn, her eyes never opened again. At dawn, Thomas sat by the window, his newborn son in his arms, watching the light spill over the red hills. He buried her beneath the oak and beside his first wife, and whispered, "You both gave me something I didn't deserve and love." He raised the boy himself, taught him to ride, to love the land, and to listen when the wind told stories of those who came before. And every evening when the sun sank behind the hills, he'd swear he saw her, standing by the fence, smiling through the light. This isn't a story about sin or scandal. It's about redemption. Two broken hearts that found peace in the dust of the forgotten West. Thomas never married again. He didn't need to. His love story was written not with ink or words, but with dust, blood, and forgiveness. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Because even in the silent corners of the Old West, love still rides. Long after the dust has settled and the hearts have stopped beating,